Here's a fact. The overwhelming majority of policy abuses by schools would have never happened if the parents had done their job in opposing them. Corollary to that, most of university lunacy would cease to exist if the parents had done their job in instilling some proper values in their offspring. In other news, Venezuela is providing yet another example of how socialism and utter savagery go hand in hand, leaving only the question of when and not the question of if it will happen when it comes to the outcomes of socialism. Also, have you ever wondered what the world would look like without busybody local bureaucrats who regulate a lot more than it should ever be tolerated? The residents of Chicago should ask themselves this exact thing during this election cycle if they want to avoid future death. And finally, we'll have an honest discussion and situation assessment concerning the upcoming opening of a transgender children dating website. Yes, really. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to the 16th edition of Periodic Insanity. Alright, it's been a lot of insanity lately, so we'll basically have at least 2 episodes in less than a week in order to for us to catch up with all of it while still maintaining the tradition of keeping these episodes around the 45-minute mark and always under 1 hour. So, to continue where we left it off in the previous episode, we'll start with a piece of news that pretty much reinforces the point made in the last one. If you haven't seen the last episode, I said then that parents bear a much larger responsibility in the fact that many schools have been subverted to the point of now being tools of the maximal nanny state. So here it is, coming from The Independent: parents keep children at home in protest after school removes wall from front of girls' toilets. And it goes like this, quote, "Parents are keeping their children at home in protest against the Merseyside school's decision to remove the front wall of a girls' toilet block, which they say is making pupils feel scared and unsafe. A privacy row has erupted between St. Mary's College in Walsall and parents after the exterior wall was removed to make the toilets open plan. Pictures sent to the Independent show that the toilet cubicle doors are now exposed to an open corridor and are in clear sight of at least one classroom and a CCTV camera. It is believed that the decision has been made by the school in a bid to stop smoking, bullying and truancy, with the new layout meaning pupils can no longer hide in between lessons. Tara Hodgson-Jones, who has a daughter in year 11 and a son in year 9 at the school, saw the toilets for herself when she attended a parents' evening at the school on Friday. She told The Independent that she's keeping her daughter at home as she does not feel safe with the new toilet layout. My sister and neighbors are doing exactly the same with their daughters, Miss Hodgson added. Apparently they are starting on the boys' toilets next week, so I'll be keeping my son off too if they do the same. My daughter told me about it on Thursday, but I thought she was making a big deal over nothing until I saw it for myself. We tried to walk to my son's head of year about it, but he said he couldn't comment and that we wouldn't have to make an appointment with the head teacher on Monday, which we'll be doing. I want this resolving. My daughter sits her GCSEs this year, so this is an extreme measure on my part. If the problem is bullying, smoking and skipping class, they should have approached things in so many other ways. My daughter was bullied in year 10. And that was in the classroom, the yard and the lunch hall, so thinking that was taking a toilet wall down will stop it is stupid. As for smoking, maybe put alarms in. As for skipping class, use for frosted glass so teachers can see shapes when they walk past. My daughter feels scared and unsafe. It's shocking. St. Mary's College is a voluntary aided academy for 11 to 19 years olds, meaning it is not governed by a local authority. Online, the Catholic school describes its mission as being inspired by the Spirit of Jesus Christ and that the school is for the personal development of every member through service to each other. On Twitter, one parent wrote, "My daughter has come home the last 2 days from this school and feels appalled by this and says she has no privacy." Whereas another took a different viewpoint and said, "My daughter attends this school and I don't see it is as a bad thing. I do believe it's for the protection of the students and school safety." Really don't know what the fuss is about, close quote. And there you go. Now, of course, this is an egregious example of abuse against which at least some parents are speaking up, but in the vast majority of cases, the vast majority of the parents are like the ones quoted in the latter part of the article. "Oh well, what's the fuss about? It's just for the protection of the students and school safety." You're not against safety, are you? And this is where parents need to learn to answer, yes, I am against safety. If by safety you mean destroying every single trace of privacy and liberty of my child. The old Franklinian adage that those who give up liberty for security deserve neither is every bit as true in adult politics as it is in children's politics. And that's not hard to see. A short trip to a nightclub will do much in this department. It's very easy to make an educated guess about whose parents were helicopter parents, i.e. those obsessed with security and protection and safety, and whose parents were normal. Though we no longer say normal these days, there's a new euphemism for that too: free-range parenting, which is really just normal parenting. It is not controversial at all to say that people who grew up mollycoddled fare a lot worse in life than people who grew up without being pandered to. It's also not controversial to say that most of the early adolescence experiences that these totalitarian control freaks are trying to stamp out are indeed beneficial and, yes, character building. What is controversial to say, at least in some circles, is to say that it is terrible to bring up a generation of wusses. But that's exactly what's happening. You wonder why there's so much excess in the young adult population? Well, it could be because they have their first beer at the age of 20 and their first cigarette at the age of 19 or so. You cannot have a culture that is tolerant with vice while at the same time have an educational culture that doesn't even attempt to teach the next generation how to manage this freedom. And more importantly, you cannot have 100% compliance without ruining 100% of the people involved. A good policy is a policy that gets it right most of the time while at the same time allows for evil, however that is defined, to exist and admits it exists. And this is the problem with modern-day control freaks. They take the absurd position that they can stamp out 100% of whatever they see as evil, be it bullying, skipping classes, or smoking. Though on the topic of smoking, there's a very good article on the website The Conservative Women. Very fitting since this is a Catholic school we're talking about. Basically, in the current year, the Catholic message is like this: smoking is evil, but killing babies is just fine. The Pope banned the sale of cigarettes in his backyard, but also decorated a militant abortionist from the Netherlands. Terrible! So, to sum up, parents need to take responsibility for all of these things, with few exceptions, which are really just UK-based exceptions, because most of Europe is far more sensible with these things. So with few exceptions, almost all of this nonsense in the education practice is happening because the parents are tolerating the nonsense. Most of this lunacy would disappear in less than 3 months if the parents would grow a spine, show up at the school and say, "No, enough is enough." But they don't, and most won't, anytime soon anyway. Not only because many of them are subverted themselves, but also because they don't know they can do it. Not to mention that too many commentators have completely abandoned the old standard in which the parent is responsible for most of the things happening with and to their child, especially if the minor is under the age of 13 or 14. Anyway, let's go to the next story. Also from the education sector, same country, Leeds University is hiring 5 hate crime support student ambassadors. And I wish I were joking. According to this ad posted on the university's website, the ambassadors will be working 8 hours a week and be paid £8.19 per hour. So that's 262-ish pounds a month. Not bad for a job of communist informant, essentially. The ad reads, quote, "The role of a hate crime support student ambassador is a great opportunity to help us make a difference to the lives of our students. This jointly funded project with the University of Leeds will enable the successful applicants to put in motion a series of activities and support that will be embedded into university policy and practice, as well as creating sustainable legacy. You will be supporting the delivery of a campus-wide challenge report and support culture that ensures all students have a safe environment in which to study and live. The responsibilities of the role will include to create an increase in the awareness of hate crime and incidents and the current reporting systems in place, to support and encourage students to report incidents and access support, to network and build relationships with relevant groups and organizations, work with partners and relevant people within the LEU and the university on campaigns and the development of an online reporting system. The successful candidates will get to work with a broad range of students and stakeholders and will be based within our help and support team. They will be working closely with student groups and societies and will have a good understanding of the impact of hate incidents on student well-being. If you feel that you could contribute to our team, feel excited by the challenge, please do apply." Now, please, by all means, you tell me who is the extremist here. People like me who say that universities need to be abandoned and disbanded since they are a hindrance to society and the next generation and maybe rebuilt afterwards? Or people who dictate the policy, who are essentially recruiting more ideologues and grooming even more apparatchiks for an increasingly totalitarian and all-encompassing state? Serious question. Who is the extremist here? Please do take your time to think. For several decades, academics have been able to do so much damage precisely because the general populace did not take the time to look into what these loons are up to. This is finally starting to change, but we're still far from the critical mass. We're far from reaching the level of the average Joe being aware that academics are, for the most part, essentially demented and that their usefulness to society needs to be reevaluated before they make even more damage. That is something we need to cultivate even further. Because if enough of this nonsense goes unabated, well, look up my old video, The Thin Layer of Civilization, to get an idea about what happens next. Again, I do not want that to happen. The whole point of doing all of this is to end up being wrong myself, precisely because I think it is not inevitable. The course can be changed, provided that we want it to change. Alright, let's go to the next story. Coming from Venezuela, via the Daily Mail, starving mob beat cattle to death with rocks in desperate search for food, and 4 people are killed during looting in Venezuela as country's economic collapse continues. It goes like this, quote, "A shocking video showing a starving Venezuelan mob beating a cow to death with stones has gone viral amid violent protests that have left 4 people dead. Dozens of men shout, 'We are hungry,' and people are suffering as they surround the cow in the field, throwing stones at it and beating it with a stick. The helpless animal was slaughtered at the Hacienda Miraflores in the fishing village Palmarito in Merida during a day deadly of civil unrest and looting in the state. When the animal finally falls to the ground in the footage, more villagers gathered around, presumably to begin the distribution of its meat. According to local media, dozens of cows were killed by the crowds at several different ranches. They're hunting. The people are hungry," says the narrator of the video who filmed the incident from his car. Opposition Congressman Carlos Paparoni posted the footage on social media to show the desperation that many Venezuelans are experiencing in the face of scarcity and controversial policies introduced by President Nicolás Maduro. This is not the way. These actions will destroy our national production more quickly and bring more hunger and scarcity, said Paparoni. He said about 300 animals were believed to have been killed in the area. Calm soon returned to the troubled areas, which are rocked by the scenes of looting in recent days, but not before 4 people died and 10 were injured. People went down to a center which stored food and gas bottles and caused damage and stole flour, rice, oil and gas, said Zuli Urdaneta, a veterinarian and farmer from the village of Tucani, who also said that a government supermarket was looted. Urdaneta, age 50, also witnessed the looting of a truck along the highway around 2 p.m. on Thursday the afternoon. About 2 hours later, he said some 800 people converged on a food collection center and proceeded to plunder it. They knocked down the gates and looted flour, rice, cooking oil, cooking gas, etc., said Urdaneta. The police and the National Guard tried to control the situation by giving out what was left. 4 years of recession and the world's highest inflation have plunged millions of Venezuelans into poverty, and President Maduro's authoritarian socialist regime faces mounting unrest. Looting has been increasing in the provinces since Christmas, with food shortages and hyperinflation leaving millions of people hungry, though the capital, Caracas, has so far been largely unaffected. The opposition says Maduro's failed economic policies and rampant corruption are to blame for the meltdown in the once booming country home to the world's largest crude reserves. What we're living is barbaric, said opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido in a tweet referencing to the slaughter of the cattle. The dehumanizing regime of Nicolás Maduro is turning a blind eye to the tragedy that we Venezuelans are living. Maduro's government accuses political opponents and business-friendly foreign powers of trying to foment a social uprising against him by stoking inflation and hoarding food. Yeah, it's always about you, Herr Maduro, isn't it? In what they said was an attempt to combat speculation, authorities last week forced over 200 supermarkets to slash prices, creating chaos as desperate Venezuelans leapt at the chance to buy cheaper food. Some supermarkets were sold out of fruit and vegetables, and the staff were unsure if the shelves would be replenished. Okay, so this is officially getting worse than the last days of Ceausescu here. Now, I have compared in the past the situation in Venezuela with the situation in 1980s Romania, specifically the period between 1986 and 1989, because up to a point the situation was comparable. More and more unrest was brewing. I mean, the international community is aware of the 1989 violent uprising, but that was just the one that succeeded and ended up being broadcasted live on TV. There were at least 3 others before that one in the previous years, including one in the same year. But now Venezuela has the worst of both worlds and then some. It has the level of inflation that we saw here in Romania in early 1990s, only it is far worse in Venezuela now, even when compared to peak inflation level of 96-97, and it also has the level of goods and services shortage we had in 88-89, and none of the mitigating circumstances. I mean, back in the 80s, we would compensate the shortage of food in the socialist commerce by barter and underground trading with people from the countryside. I mean, yeah, sure, it wasn't legal, but it worked most of the time, and very important, it ended up preventing the kind of violent savagery that we see in Venezuela right now. Sure, there were occasional brawls in the Ronquis on the official stores, but nothing to the extent of what we see now in Venezuela. Also, as I said 2 years ago, at least in the 90s when we had rampant inflation, there was a de facto free market available for the average person. So the consequences of the inflation could be mitigated by private initiative, which explains why it has never gotten worse than a certain point. But in Venezuela, no such thing exists. So just as I predicted 2 years ago in the video "Get Ready, Venezuela is Going Down," the inflation continues to spiral even further to the point that they might need to pull a Zimbabwe to fix it, namely to indefinitely suspend the national currency and use the US dollar or maybe the Brazilian real or some other currency that is at least somewhat stable and definitely much more in line with the rest of the world. Now look, I don't know when things are going to get better in Venezuela, but I do know that they will continue to get worse as long as the socialist policies continue. Now notice that I said the socialist policies and not the socialist regime. And that is because most of the so-called opposition are also very leftists themselves as well. And without policies of the liberal economic bent, things will not get better. And without liberal economics, the near future of Venezuela will be more of the same. More death, more savagery, more misery, even more poverty, and yes, it is possible, and of course, more violence. And in the years that come, the example of Venezuela should become house example on why Marxism doesn't work. After all, Venezuela is a textbook example. They established a socialist state and then finally the state withered away. Yet the populace did not get better. Quite the opposite. And the country did not become a socialist stateless utopia where everyone is equal. Quite the opposite. Because that's what always happens with Marxism. If you emphasize equality over liberty, you get none of them. Whereas if you emphasize liberty over equality, well, you get a decent dose of both. And that's really the issue with all utopian ideas. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. Alright, let's go to the next story. Oh yeah, this is really insane. So, actually I shouldn't be laughing, this is terrible. Via NBC Chicago, Elgin man told to stop slumber parties for homeless during cold, he says. It's quite a long article, but it made my blood boil when I read it the first time. So, quote, a suburban Chicago resident who was offering up slumber parties in his basement for homeless people in his neighborhood during dangerously cold weather says city officials have given him an ultimatum. Stop the slumber parties or the house will be condemned. Greg Schiller of Elgin said that he began letting a group of homeless people sleep in his unfinished basement last month during brutally cold nights, offering them food, warm beverages, and a cot to sleep on while watching movies. I would stay up all night with them and give them coffee and stuff and feed them, he said, adding that no drugs or alcohol were allowed inside his residence during the evening events. Last winter, Schiller offered up his garage to our area homeless, but said he was told he could no longer do so after EMTs were called to help a man with a heart condition. That's when he had the idea to move them to his basement, complete with all the activities needed to consider them simply slumber parties. Schiller believed city code allowed for slumber parties, but officials said that there are sleeping regulations for basements and Schiller's basement doesn't meet these requirements. While we appreciate those who volunteer to provide additional resources in the community, Mr. Schiller's house does not comply with codes and regulations that guard against potential dangers such as carbon monoxide poisoning, inadequate light and ventilation, and insufficient exits in the event of a fire, city spokesperson Molly Center said in a statement. Schiller said city officials and police officers come to his home with a warrant Tuesday and went into his basement. There, he said they found his ceiling height was too low and windows too high and too small to be an egress. They shut me down and said I have 24 hours to return my basement to storage and take down, I have several cots with sleeping bags for everyone, or they will condemn the house. Center confirmed that Schiller was given 24 hours to clear the basement in an email statement, adding, if not, the city will take additional enforcement action to compel the removal of the unlawful basement sleeping area. Officials had earlier threatened citations for other violations at the home, which is owned by Schiller's girlfriend, including a broken window, a fold-up trailer on the property, and a portable toilet he had set up for the group to use, Schiller said. I'm trying to help these people get out of the cold, he told NBC5. There's not a lot of help for them as far as places to lay their heads. Schiller said he only opened up the basement when an area shelter wasn't available. He noted that some shelters in the area require homeless to meet a specific set of criteria, and others open only when temperatures reach a certain level. PADS of Elgin confirmed that there are requirements to be eligible for their services, but declined to specify what that criteria included. An emergency shelter at the First United Methodist Church of Elgin, operated by the organization Matthew 2540, opens when the temperature outside is 15 degrees or less. That will be 15 Fahrenheit, so minus 9.5 Celsius. That's terrible. Schiller said he hosted his slumber parties when wind chill values were 15 degrees or less, but would not offer up the basement if the emergency shelter was open. It's cold enough to freeze to death, he said. Elgin has lawful shelters that provide a safe space for people to go throughout the year, Center said in a statement. In times of extreme temperature, temporary locations open within the community that all conform to regulations and codes. The city also noted there is a women's shelter and other facilities in the area where people can go. A full list can be found on the city's website, close quote. Fucking hell, you filthy socialist degenerates! This is why these people need to be helicoptered. I mean, this is textbook, let them eat cake. Oh, you can't house homeless men in your house because more regulations. But you know, there's a women's shelter available in the area. Amazing. This, my fellow deplorables, is straight out of the old Soviet Union. I mean, if it weren't for the busybody local government, who would stop people from voluntarily helping those in need? For their own safety, of course. And I'm not engaging in hyperbole when I say this is straight out of the old Soviet Union. In fact, it's actually slightly worse. In the USSR, or anywhere else in the communist world for that matter, until 1991, at the very least, not sure about present-day North Korea, for instance, but in the USSR, there was no such thing as sleeping regulations. Even the party of Brezhnev and Stalin believed that the way you sleep should be your choice and not the prerogative of the state, especially if you're talking about how you sleep in your own house. But not in Chicago, apparently. This is, simply put, crazy. And no, I'm not interested in the safety argument. Fuck the bureaucratic understanding of safety. In the opinion of these bureaucrats, it is better to leave homeless men outside in minus 10 degrees Celsius to literally freeze to death than for them to stay indoors, get warm beverages, and sleep in a sleeping bag, and maybe risk some bullshit intoxication that really never happened, since this fine gentleman has been doing this for several years now, and everyone was fine. That is why I don't buy the safety argument, because it is brutally absurd. But what's even more absurd is the bureaucrat going, oh well, just go to a lawful shelter. Look, there is a women's shelter in the area, but the victims are men, you muppet. It's also a good indicator who really matters here. Women, and only women, are the only people that matter. If this guy had been housing homeless women, they would have given him a feminist grant to upgrade his basement. But because he allows anyone indiscriminately, which means the overwhelming majority of the beneficiaries are men, since the overwhelming majority of the homeless people are men, he gets harassed with this kind of disdainful nonsense. This is no longer just a case of the state actively supporting women at all costs and explicitly at the expense of men. This is a case of the state actively killing men. There. I said it. And this is why we can't have nice things. This is why. Because of this kind of insanity. This is why people like Charles Murray and many other libertarians concerned with practical politics keep on insisting that local politics matter the most. Because at the end of the day, it is not the federal government that can get into your house and punish you for sleeping the wrong way. It is always the local bureaucrats whose power remained unchecked for far too many decades. This is why in practical politics videos I never advise anyone to start a European political party or even a national movement in the case of the United States in most cases, not just because such thing is hard and usually fails, but because most of the totalitarian nonsense comes from your own city halls or town halls. Most of the nonsense can be fixed at local level. And this horrible case is just one example. In a normal world, all of these idiots in the city hall would be voted out and replaced with people whose first job would be to either abolish or severely reform the so-called city regulations. Because there is no rational argument for why city regulations would empower the local police to tell people where they are allowed to sleep on their own property. Such a regulation is, put simply, absurd. And it absolutely needs to go. Alright. And the final piece of news in this episode is also one that really made my blood boil. Coming from a news source that is quite unusual for this channel, Neon Nettle, but I assure you the piece of news is legit because I've been following this case closely for several months now. The headline reads, 10-year-old transgender boy is starting a website for trans children. I almost don't need to read the rest of the article, isn't it? I mean, most of those words should not be anywhere near next to each other. 10-year-old and dating website don't mix together. 10-year-old transgender and dating websites should be grounds for the CPS to remove the child from that family. But the CPS, the Child Protection Services that is just as insane, if not more insane, than the parents of this poor kid. So let's read. Please be firm in your chair because this is top-tier insanity. Quote, a 10-year-old transgender boy says he's founding the world's first dating site for transgender children. Desmond Napoles, aka Desmond is Amazing, is launching the new website that aims to encourage kids to switch genders in an online drag club. The House of Amazing site will be a no-parent zone designed to invite gender-fluid and trans-curious minors into an encouraging and safe online community for drag kids to connect with each other. According to a promotional flyer for the new site, it has been established exclusively for kids who are doing amazing drag. The site's admin will approve all applicants manually and block access from parents or children who sign up using their offensive born gender to ensure the drag kids feel safe to express themselves. Desmond Napoles has been dressing in drag since he was a toddler after his mother declared him gender neutral as a baby, a Daily Mail report said. He said he has always thought that using your born gender is wrong and has always worn girls' clothing, but confessed he has never tried wearing boys' clothes. Now do stop right there. I should need more of these. So, this is very hard to process. So, translation. This kid has literally been indoctrinated into militant, deviant behavior by his mother. Remember when we used to consider it lunacy when the religious right would tell us that exactly this is going to happen if the normalization of deviancy continues? Well, I do remember, and that's why I changed my opinion on the slippery slope. Because the slippery slope is absolutely real. This is why I'm so belligerent on the topic of transgenderism, because there is no way, under any circumstance, that I can just tolerate the destruction of children on the altar of sexual diversity, or whatever the euphemism today is. In fact, I also have in the making a much longer video specifically on transgender children who are in fact overwhelmingly the victims of insane activist parents and brutally unethical medical establishment. Because transgender child is essentially like a vegan cat. The subjects are not the ones making the choices. Let's read some more, because this is getting a lot worse. Quote, his family introduced him to the gay scene from an early age, and he has gained fame on the New York drag circuit as his drag alter ego, Desmond is Amazing. Ever since day one, ever since I was able to walk, I used to take my mom's towels and take her heels and clomp around the house, Naples said. Put the towel on my head, wrap a towel around my body, and run away down my house. At age 6, his parents began dressing him in princess costumes and dresses, the report said. His parents consulted a doctor about having gender reassignment surgery, but were told it was best to allow Desmond develop naturally and to explore his tastes in clothing, toys, and activities for himself. The boy's family continued to dress him in drag, and he was featured in 2014 in a music video with drag celebrities RuPaul and Jinx Monsoon when he was 7 years old. Images and videos of him went viral in 2015 when he appeared on the New York's Gay Pride event wearing a rainbow tutu and sparkled gold beret, with Naples being crowned as the youngest member of the New York's longtime Vogue dance house iconic House of Ultra Omni. His parents say they hope he will one day have his own fashion and cosmetics line with the right guidance. Naples refers to himself as a drag kid as opposed to a drag queen, with the explanation that the term drag queen should only refer to adults, but hopes his new term will catch on and encourage other children to follow in his steps. Naples came out as gay last year after being a long-time advocate for LGBTQ issues. He's 10, for fuck's sake! His parents say their son is not yet sexually active, but say soon he will have reached the age where sexual relations are appropriate or discussed explicitly. He told Out magazine last fall his advice for other kids was to ignore parental concerns about gender transitioning and suggesting running away from home if parents are not supportive, saying, "If you don't like me, I'm gonna leave." Naples told kids if they feel suicidal, don't commit because there's always love in the world. There are a lot of people like you, and my motto is be yourself always. The House of Amazing dating website and phone apps remain in production from last October, with more information to be forthcoming, though Naples does have a website, Instagram account, and Facebook page. Naples sent out a message to his haters via his Instagram account, which is run by his mother, saying he was secure in who he was and they will not change or shame him. "You mean nothing to me," he said. "You are like a fly I shoo away," close quote, and good God. And this, my fellow deplorables, is exactly why I would rather lose the so-called moderate subscribers and be thought of as a transphobe and a hater. Because I would rather be a hater than be in any way complicit to such extreme degrees of degeneracy. And mind you, it's not the kid that I loathe. I think the kid is entirely a victim of his activist parents, a victim of the ideologically driven so-called child protective services, and ultimately a victim of the social justice warriors in the academia and the middle-class left-wing pricks in the cathedral media who have been promoting this degeneracy for decades. And almost nobody spoke up. The kid is innocent here. It's the adults around him that are not. Because ultimately this is not and should not be a partisan issue. If we can't agree that sexualizing 8-year-olds is a bad thing, then we really cannot agree about anything. Taking 8-year-olds to gay prides and putting 7-year-olds in drag to appear in music videos? Good Lord, what the hell are we doing here? And again, the Child Protective Services has already been called on this degenerate group that calls itself a family, and apparently they found nothing wrong. The very institution that was meant to protect kids from such insanity has already failed, repeatedly. The CPS is concerned with saving children from the perils of homeschooling and religious Christian upbringing because heaven forbid they learn about the cultural heritage of the civilization they were born into. Meanwhile, turning 7-year-olds into travestites? Yeah, that's totally A-okay. Apparently. This cannot go on for far too long. And I'm not talking here specifically about this kid. This kid has a terrible life in front of him. I would love to see an interview with him 15 years from now, when he will be age 25. That is, if he is still alive by then and doesn't off himself once the glamour goes out and his brain fully matures and understands the colossal damage that's been done to him. What I am referring here when I say that this cannot go on for long is the phenomenon itself. Because it's not just this kid. This is just the most extreme case I am personally aware of. But there are many others promoted not on Facebook but in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Not to mention the slews of militants who are already into the mainstream of various other countries of Europe. Norway being a prime example, and I'll make another separate video about Norway soon enough. Though you can watch my videos from 2016 about Norway specifically, the videos called Carnival Cancelled because the kids dressed gender stereotypically from February 2016, and Norway's Intellectuals, Transgender Children Need Recognition from March 2016. And again, it's not just Norway either. It's Australia, it's Sweden, it's Italy, it's Slovenia, it's France. This insanity already is inside the curricula of most of our children. For more of the curricula, by the way, you could see my March 2016 video called Masturbation Classes for 3-year-olds. And no, that's not a joke either. And we should all have an incentive to fight against this, including if we live in a place where this doesn't happen yet. Because if this lunacy is not curbed, then we can kiss goodbye to having a functional civilization several decades down the line. It's really that simple. But even if you don't care about the future of civilization, it is still wrong to harm and confuse children in this fashion. And again, if we cannot agree on that, then we really cannot agree on pretty much anything. I don't think you need to be a conservative or a reactionary or whatever to believe that it was better back in the day when even the most libertine and sexually tolerant families, it was still regarded as improper for a 10-year-old child to talk about his or her sexuality. And I say this because I was raised in a libertine environment when it came to sexual matters, and anything sexual next to individuals younger than 13 or 14 was regarded as a total no-no, even by the most libertine individuals around me. The mantra was, you'll have plenty of time for that when you grow older. And the same should be applied to all of these cases. This kid will have plenty of time to be a drag queen or a homosexual or an LGBT queerty advocate or whatever he wants to be. He will have plenty of time to do that once he turns at least 14 or 15, which I realize it's still too early for some of my viewers, but it's the standard we apply in most of Europe. It should not be a partisan conservative position to believe it is entirely inappropriate to have 10-year-olds having dating sites or engaging in genderist confusion. It should also not be a partisan position to believe that it is inappropriate to have adult parents spewing their nonsense through their children, advising other children to run away from home if the parents don't go along with the sexual deviancy that the kid might have seen on the internet. Holy shit, none of what I said now should even have to be said in the first place. Jesus Christ. Alright, I'll rant more about this topic in a dedicated video, but seriously, this needs to be fought tooth and nail. There cannot be a compromise on these things. Now, adults are a different issue where nuance can be admitted and live and let live should remain paramount, but when it comes to children, a lot more needs to be done by everyone with a conscience. Bloody hell. So, with all of that being said, this was the 16th episode of Periodic Insanity. Now, you tell me, am I being too harsh? And I'm not asking this out of routine. I'm genuinely curious. And specifically, if you believe I am too harsh, please, by all means, explain how a less harsh approach would yield similar or superior results. Because I'm not interested in being harsh for harshness' sake. I'm interested in ways to curb this insane trend. That's it. So with all that being said, please do subscribe to my social media. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. And yeah, I guess I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.